So welcome to each of you. Let's give them a round of applause to welcome them. So Sudha, can we start with you? I think a lot of people in the audience would like to know what the categories are of these neurodementia illnesses. So we use Alzheimer's disease to cover a lot of ground, but there are many different types of dementia. And so my question to get us going is, can you help us parse how these different disorders fit to get us started so we can figure out where to go from here?
Thank you for that question, and thank you all for the welcome. Dementia is a sort of umbrella term that we use when somebody has difficulty, deterioration in their memory or other aspects of thinking that's bad enough to keep them from doing what they wish to do. If it is milder and people are compensating, we call it mild cognitive impairment. And that's a warning sign that might progress to dementia. There are about 20 different things that can cause dementia, and often more than one might be the cause of the disease in a given person. One big thing that about 70% of people with dementia have amyloid plaques and tau tangles in their brain. This was described by Alois Alzheimer in 1901, and that is what we call Alzheimer's disease as a cause of dementia. We now know that these build up over about 2 decades, and we are calling it Alzheimer's disease preclinical when there's the buildup without the actual memory problems. Other types of dementia are like dementia with Lewy bodies that looks a little bit like Parkinson's sometimes. Frontotemporal dementia, where the first symptoms may be behavior problems and may run in families. And vascular dementia. Many of us end up having hypertension, diabetes, and these things damage the brain and may act along with the other things like Alzheimer's to worsen it.
Excellent. So is there a new nomenclature coming, do you think, for this? Or do you think something, I mean, this is a little hard for everybody to sort out. What do you think?
So because there is so much stress and anxiety around the terms dementia, the DSM-5 suggested calling it major cognitive disorder and minor cognitive disorder. Whether that will take off is still a question. In 2018, there was also formal Alzheimer's disease criteria that then depended on whether we could show that there was amyloid and tau in the brain, either by taking some spinal fluid, doing a lumbar puncture, and looking for these proteins, or doing a sort of sophisticated PET imaging, which many of our institutions have, and showing the same amyloid and tau. Now, those are somewhat either very expensive or a little hard to go through. So there's a lot of interest now in blood markers, other kind of things like walking, looking into your retina, that might provide clues as to what type of dementia.
Dr. Shea, you're the director of a new initiative at UT San Antonio called the Brain Health Consortium. And the name implies that forming a consortium where there are collaborators who cross-pollinate and talk to each other is, in fact, valuable. So could you tell the audience what you think the advantages are of forming such an amalgam and where it's going?
Thank you, Dr. Heinrich, for this question. And also thank you, all of you, for welcoming me as well. So we all heard that the brain diseases are particularly challenging, and because of just the complexity of the brain. And there's so much we still don't know, while there's so much scientists and clinicians have discovered that we do know. So, but why, how can we get there faster and more effectively? And so one of the new ideas of doing science and working together is by forming this type of brain health consortium, which is really a collaborative team. And as the Chancellor mentioned, here in Texas, we're very optimistic and we're very collaborative. And so we really want to take advantage of that essence and that culture. And
did you all know each other before today?
We've been working together since I became Texan.
Just asking.
Twice as long as the Chancellor.
This is a really wonderful opportunity where we have our individual tools. Think about it as our own toys, but by working together, we could really build something great.
It sounds like the networking would be very valuable to do this, so that you're sharing in real time what's going on in terms of leading edge research, which is the idea, I guess.
Yes.
So, Dr. Pedafar, you're the chair of a department at the Mulva Clinic here in Austin, a new medical school, a new endeavor. And I guess the question for many people in this area would be, what's the top of mind first priority for the way you're addressing this issue in this community? And then, if you can, tell us how it might interact and might be connected with other communities in Texas.
Thank you very much. It's a real honor to be part of this discussion here today. So the Mulva Clinic for Neurosciences is really focused on building a world-class institution for understanding, preventing, and treating individuals with neurological conditions. In the realm of Alzheimer's and dementia, the topic of our discussion, that was actually the very first clinic that we opened, and we felt that the backbone and the core mission is to develop an understanding of the problem in Central Texas, the population that we are serving, and the folks who really helped to create the medical school and the Mulva Clinic for Neurosciences. So that clinical system really began with speaking with support groups, families, patients with early dementia, and understanding the nature of the problem that's throughout the Central Texas area. And it was really quite enlightening to see what the struggles were. First of all, caregiver illness is a huge issue that we then committed to building a clinical system that cares for the person with conditions associated with dementia, but also the caregiver. And so, and then the first thing that we realized is that people live in communities that have support systems in their community that's unique to where they live. And so the first thing that happens when someone comes to our clinic is, well, where do you live? And what are the support systems? The other thing that was really interesting is, and this is, I've been in Texas now, I've been a Texan now for just under 3 years, and I've been very impressed with citizen science. The fact that citizens of this region really, whatever their background and training and educational background, they're very enthusiastic about the advancement of understanding of the condition. And so one of the big priorities is viewing research as the embodiment of hope, really, that they expect us to be doing research, and they want to volunteer for research. They want to contribute. They want their grandkids and their kids to participate. And we've been very impressed with the degree of grassroots citizen
That's
science.
a good lead in. Dr. Kelly, you might speak about this too, because you lead a program that's already reasonably articulated in Dallas. And I wonder if you could tell the audience, segue from what David just said too, segue into telling us what the value is of clinical trials, because they're certainly complementary to the clinical care that you'll be providing. And why are they so important, and what role do they play in the kind of effort you're leading?
Thanks for that excellent question. Our Cognition and Memory Clinic serves a number of really critical roles in our community. We certainly provide clinical care and are a location where people can come to secure an accurate diagnosis and formulate a treatment plan. As Dr. Pedafar had mentioned, there's an expectation when people are coming in. One of the reasons they may come to a university medical center is to participate in clinical research, or because they do want to drive forward our understanding, our knowledge, and our ability to better treat these conditions. Clinical trials certainly play an important role in that. So these are the studies that we generally think about when we think of biomedical research, where somebody may come in and they may give a biological sample, like as you had mentioned, spinal fluid or a blood sample, or they may come in for an eye scan for us to better evaluate how can we detect dementia or how can we detect changes related to Alzheimer's disease earlier. They may participate in a study where we're looking at a trial of investigating a medication to see whether this may slow down the progression of Alzheimer's disease or may treat some aspect of that condition. In other words, it might alleviate some of the symptoms related to that underlying brain condition. I'm also a relatively recent addition to Texas, and I've been very thrilled to see the strong generosity and commitment of our patients and their real interest in participating in these research efforts. And we truly view them as our partners in investigation for all of what we do. I think another key aspect of our center is a strong relationship with our basic science colleagues. So this really, that relationship, so the ability to sit down and have a cup of coffee with somebody who's doing laboratory research in order to discuss how can that be translated into a human clinical trial is really critical to driving that innovation.
And that's what I think our panelists would all agree is a formula for success in all of science, which is this connection between what is found in the laboratory, because it can identify targets for new therapeutics, and in the pharmacology laboratories identify new pharmacologics, which can then be directed to a potential target. But the truth is, in Alzheimer's disease, you mentioned amyloid protein accumulation, you mentioned the tau tangles, but I'm correct in saying in front of this group that the trials to date, which have targeted reduction in amyloid or attacked tau specifically, have been disappointing at this point. Is that true, Sudha?
Absolutely. Just this year, we had 3 big failures with the amyloid. And one of the, however, I do believe that this is a time of hope because there is increasing philanthropic and national money. Genetics and other omics and sophisticated computational models, like some of the work Dr. Say does, is showing us that there's a lot more to these diseases. It's not just one disease. It varies the causes from person to person. And we have an opportunity to bring what MD Anderson has done for cancer, what Jim Ellison has done, the precision approach to diseases like dementia, and do the translational research. Just as collaboration between the Bar Shop and the Bigs, we have just this year a young Dr. Sun, who's been funded by the Bright Focus to take an idea that there are jumping genes that turn on a lot of bad genes and stop them using HIV medications, and this might be helpful.
So, Dr. Shea, could you say something about the fact, one thing that's been said here that the audience may not have known, which is that this disease, this cumulative disease of Alzheimer's disease, when it becomes clinically apparent, has been going on for decades. It's been going on for a long time. So it's not something that just happened and all of a sudden you've got a cognition problem. The question I have is how can we detect the earliest signs of it before it becomes clinically manifest, to do something to arrest the decline and plateau things? I mean, I'm thinking about a blood test that would identify a biomarker, something in the spinal fluid that would put you at risk for it. Can you speak to something about this? Because there's a chronicity, and yet you cross over the line, and all of a sudden you're aware that you've got something wrong with you.
Yes, I agree that it would be great to be able to go into a time capsule and go back in time in our own bodies and try to figure out what was the first thing that happened that's related to Alzheimer's or dementia that kind of set this path in place. And so one of the new scientific approaches to kind of go back in time is we can actually take from a blood sample from a patient with Alzheimer's disease and reprogram the blood sample into a stem cell. And these stem cells, which are normally only found back in the babies, we can recreate this process in a petri dish and then make brain-like tissue, brain cells from those stem cells, and try to understand or discover the biomarkers, the genes, other proteins.
Looking for a
particles.
clue early.
We are.
Yeah,
We are
you're looking
trying
for the
to look
clue
for
early.
a clue. And the beauty is these can be used to maybe find new drugs or new targets.
So, Dr. Pedafar, how about a completely unfair question? I want you to list the 2 things that I could do right now to avoid getting Alzheimer's disease. Just 2.
Well, it's not unfair.
I just want 2 now.
I'll just tell you the 2 things I'm going to do myself.
Okay, so you're going to tell us what you would do.
I would do.
By the way, I want the rest of you to be ready for this question because
So
we're going to
you-
compare the answer.
So it's a totally fair question. First of all, I think that the pounding of the blood pressure, this hammer effect of blood pressure against the wall of the vessel in the brain, the small blood vessels, these fragile blood vessels throughout our brain, that pounding away, well, we can't avoid it. We have to have blood pressure. However, if the blood pressure is high, I believe that time will corroborate that blood pressure control will be a major way to reduce certain forms of dementia. And I echo the previous statement that there may be different types, but the more common types, I think there's a signal from the blood vessel side that is feeding the cascade. It's really a cascade of events.
Are you arguing, though, that the blood pressure guidelines we have now need to be lowered to a certain degree? Are they too high?
They need to be tailored to individuals, and that gets to the risk factors. There are certain individuals that the ideal blood pressure for them to prevent this cascade may be different from another individual. And so personalized thinking from physicians and researchers may be a clue, and how to understand that. That will then guide something we have plenty of medications to treat, and so that may turn out to be a very important area.
So that's one.
The other one-
So, but before you let you off the hook, what about? So how do I determine what my blood pressure is? I'm a nephrologist, and I worry about blood pressure all the time, and I worry about it so much that I started antihypertensive medicine when I wasn't hypertensive to lower blood pressure to 115 systolic before when 120 or 125 was considered okay. So what level of blood pressure are you recommending here? Are you happy with the American Heart Association guidelines for blood pressure, or are you arguing for a slightly lower blood pressure than that?
I think the lower end is going to turn out to win the day.
To be better.
Yeah, that would be my personal view on it.
Okay, fair enough.
yep.
What's the second thing?
The second one is something that we all sort of instinctively know. For those of us who have relatives or friends who have cognitive impairment, we know that the progression is not slowly and continuous. There's steps, they're abrupt drops. And in fact, it's very common to say that individual had a small stroke when we don't even see the stroke. And this abrupt drop is now turning out to be preceded by a condition called delirium. And I think delirium is a condition that is often caused by the healthcare system. Elective surgery, certain anesthetics, sleep deprivation. And I personally think that that's a very fruitful area to address your question. Number 2 is that I think delirium is like throwing fuel onto the fire of causing these neurons to die. And delirium can be prevented through very simple interventions. There's a very effective delirium prevention protocol that is very irregularly implemented in hospitals. There's certain anesthetics. There are certain that have anticholinergic effect. There are many areas of ways to prevent delirium.
So you'd recommend a wider promulgation of that therapy in advance of some elective surgeries or elective places where you have to be anesthetized for something? Because you think that because we have more of those procedures, we get older and so forth.
Right, and so just to recap that point, I can't tell you how many times I've heard the story in my own family or in patients. So-and-so broke their hip, they're having elective surgery, they did fine at home, they had mild, and then next thing you know, delirium, and they don't get out of the 6 weeks they're in the hospital, and they don't get back to the
That's
work.
right, and they never get back to baseline. That's right. Dr. Kelly, what do you think? What would your 2 things be that you would do today that you'd recommend to me that I do that would give me some protection or would at least be loading the odds in favor of my not getting dementia?
From a very practical standpoint, I think there are some straightforward things that we can all do that would globally reduce our risk of dementia, reduce our risk of Alzheimer's disease. And they kind of touch on some of the concepts that we've been talking about. We could, again, as we were just talking about delirium, it's quite uncertain why it is that an episode of delirium would propagate the pathology of Alzheimer's disease. Some of the work that we are doing with our colleagues on the basic science side suggests that some aspects of inflammation within the nervous system may play an important role in propagating the disease. Likewise, there's good,
How do I avoid inflammation?
Well, so I guess the point that I'm making is that the underlying mechanisms are varied. Things like diabetes, high blood pressure, inflammatory states, those things all seem to propagate the disease. The best recommendations that I could make to this audience would be to exercise regularly. So there's numerous epidemiologic studies. In fact, it would be almost impossible to find an epidemiological study that did not associate regular engagement in physical exercise with a reduced risk of developing cognitive impairment. And that probably touches on both blood pressure, it reduces our risk of diabetes, it improves our general health, and it may also impact inflammation. Likewise, eating a healthy diet. And so there's been numerous studies of different micronutrients, most of which have not really shown a clear benefit of a specific micronutrient, but eating a diet like, the stuff that our moms all told us to eat when we were kids. We should have lots of whole grains, we should eat our vegetables.
This isn't going in the direction that I wanted it to go. Telling us to exercise and lose weight and,
Perhaps you should ask your questions more carefully.
Rhonda, did you invite this guy?
Well, we could just say dialyze them, just go dialysis.
Let's go. So, Jenny, what do you think? I mean, if you had 2 things to say.
What else do you got?
I just turned this off now.
You're through, okay. What do you think, would you say? 2 practical things that we could do?
I think, so I study brain neurogenesis, which is the idea that our brain continues to generate new brain cells throughout your life, even as we age. And I hate to say it, but the biggest stimulus of endogenous brain neurogenesis is exercise. And also getting enough sleep. So stress and sleep deprivation lowers brain neurogenesis. So this has been shown in animal studies, and I think it's also an important thing to consider for people.
Good suggestion. Sudha.
So I'm going to present this in a slightly more positive light. Having a strong brain means staying cognitively engaged and having strong social networks. So doing the kind of things you like to do. So get your exercise through dancing.
Okay. So in general, so the takeaways in all candor and seriousness, so exercise, positive, control of blood pressure, very positive at this time, since we don't know the exact cause yet. and as you say, staying engaged, keeping your mind engaged, doing something where you're stimulated, whether it's reading or do the word games my wife plays, those mathematical games, do they help? She plays the Sudoku all the time. Does that help?
If that's what
Say no if you want to say no. It's okay.
So the things that have been shown in some studies are actually continuing to do the things you do. So staying at work, retiring later, doing, if Sudoku is something you've always enjoyed, things like Lumosity have not been shown to help. But, maybe the local bridge club, volunteering at church, working with children, that seems to make differences in chemicals like brain-derived neurotrophic factor that keeps the neurons alive and promotes neurogenesis.
Let me ask a final question, the same question to each of you, and let's close on something where you think there's real promise for the future. So if you were to have one chip to play and you were going to Vegas and betting on what is going to be the most, you convinced us, I think, that this is a multifactorial problem. But if you had one chip to play on what you think is the most likely to pay the most dividends with regard to advancing us and getting someplace where we could identify these targets and we could begin to approach them, what do you think the pathophysiology place that you should go is? Where do you think the most bang for the buck is in terms of making a major change for the better? What do you think?
So as a scientist, I think we should look at causality. Many things related to Alzheimer's and dementia are correlative, but in reality, we don't really know what's the cause and effect. So I would put my eggs in the basket of finding a gene or a pathway that causes dementia.
Do you have any particular area of genes in mind as you say that? You do?
Working with SUDA, we have a set of top 10 genes, and we
good to hear. So you've got-
we could use gene editing, CRISPR, to demonstrate causality.
Very good.
In
So
these systems.
very good. You answered the question. So that's exactly what I think we wanted to hear, is that you're focused on what you think is an area of promise, and that you're going to dive into that and drill a hole in that place. David, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that it's clear there's a cascade that leads to many things, leading to degeneration and death of cells with aging, associated with age. And all these other factors we've discussed feed into that. I think the earliest cascade that might be fruitful, if you want to kind of nip it at the bud at the earliest, highest level, a lot of the evidence, including genetic, suggests that certain components of innate immunity and blood-brain barrier, and that might be the nexus of how blood pressure and inflammation lead to this cascade, feed-forward cascade in a spiral. So if I were to go after it, I would look right at that juncture of blood-brain barrier and innate immunity.
Nexus. Brendan, what do you think?
I guess picking up on some of those themes, so we've recognized, particularly over the last decade, we conceptualize these diseases. We talked about a lot of different dementias, and we conceptualize them now as involving specific proteins like tau, or like a protein called alpha-synuclein, and understanding how it is that when that protein processing goes awry, whether it's neuroinflammation or whether it's a set of genes that are turned on, what it is that propagates that protein pathology to spread from one neuron to another, and targeting at that point, so that even if that train were to start to go off the tracks, so that you could, in essence, halt that process. That's, to my mind, the critical step in being able to stop or slow down
So
these
the
diseases.
propagation angle is what you'd spend
Correct.
your time, your efforts on if you had one thing to do. Sudha, last word to you.
I wanted to bring up one thing, the Hispanic population. We have in Texas 2 out of 5 Texans are Hispanic. And understanding the disease in this group is in its infancy compared to others. One way of seeing what happens over time, besides in a test tube, is with real people and populations. The Framingham study, 70 years, has given us a lot of answers. In the same ways, studying African Americans gave a drug that worked to lower cholesterol in everybody. This was done in Houston. So I would also agree with understanding proteins, being able to turn them off on with specific chemicals, and focusing on our state's population, especially those who have not yet been studied well.
Very good. Well, a discussion that really scratches the surface of this complex problem, but I hope you're feeling a bit buoyed by the fact that these outstanding individuals, these outstanding scientists and clinicians have chosen to tackle what is the vexing problem of our time, and that with their devoted energy to this problem with their coworkers and their teams, that results which inure a benefit to all of us, to our families, generations to come, is not too far down the road. Let's thank them for their participation. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks, Jenny.